If you've been watching Test Drive for any amount of time, you'll know that I like to do things a little differently compared to other YouTubers and journalists, which is why we've got this showdown for you today. We're comparing the 2019 Volkswagen Golf Alltrack and the 2019 Volkswagen Tiguan Highline. These are pretty similar, both in terms of price, power, performance, and what they have to offer. But as a journalist, I feel that it is my duty and responsibility to get people informed about the wagon options out there, while also taking a look at the crossovers. So we're going to be showing everything that's similar, different, and which one might be for you if you're in the market for a small family vehicle and deciding whether or not you need a wagon or a crossover. Before we go into all the details, I want to give a big thanks to Volkswagen Saint-Hyacinthe for helping us out with this episode. I came to them yesterday to ask if we could film one of their Tiguans, and they agreed. They're located just south of the Autoroute 20 here in Saint-Hyacinthe, and they have a huge selection of new and pre-owned vehicles, including the new Jetta GLI and the new Arteon, which we're both pretty excited to get into. So you can check them out here in Saint-Hyacinthe, and again, thanks to them for helping us out. Now here's why I say that these two vehicles are comparable. First of all, they're all based on the same platform, Volkswagen's MQB platform, which really is the underpinning of almost all their new vehicles. But they really do compare quite well when you start looking at the stats. The Alltrack on my left, or your right, has a 1.8-liter turbocharged inline-4 engine, produces 168 horsepower, 199 pound-feet of torque, and it weighs 1,577 kilograms as configured. Again, this is the Alltrack, also has the driver assistance package. The power to weight ratio is a little bit better on it than it is on the Tiguan. The Tiguan uses a 2-liter inline-4 turbocharged engine, 184 horsepower with 221 pound-feet of torque, 1,750 kilograms, so a little heavier, but a little bit more power. But again, that power to weight ratio is just a little lower than it is on the Golf Alltrack. Now, sometimes when we film these showdown episodes, I can't get the exact vehicle that we wanted. It's just based on dealership inventory and whether the car's there or prepped or not. So this one has the R-Line package on it instead of the driver assistance package, but at the end of the day, they're pretty comparable. The Volkswagen Golf Alltrack as configured is 38,673 Canadian, and if we had the exact one that we were looking for the Tiguan, it would be 40,870, but because it's got the R-Line package instead, and that driver assistance package would add a few things such as a 360-degree camera and a remote starter. So cool things to have there. But aside from that, they are pretty comparable. They have a lot of the same exterior tech. Both have adaptive front LED headlights as well as fog lights. Now the fog lights aren't LED, but that's not a huge deal killer. They have parking sensors on the front and the back. Both of them have backup cameras as equipped. Both of them have heated outside mirrors, and both of them have panoramic sunroofs. It's out back that things get a little different. Obviously, as a wagon, you're a little bit lower to the ground. You have a little bit less ground clearance, and the trunk size, while still very good, is a little bit smaller. So those are things to consider, but overall the vehicles are pretty close. You sit a little bit higher, obviously, in the Tiguan, which we'll talk about when we get onto the inside. But overall, tech-wise, they are pretty much on par, which really makes the Golf Alltrack like a car version of the Tiguan, which makes sense. Again, they're based on the same platform. They have all the same tech. But one thing that the enthusiasts will be looking for when it comes to either of these vehicles will be the transmissions. On the Tiguan, you have an 8-speed Tiptronic automatic transmission. But with the Golf Alltrack, you have two options. This one, as configured, has the 6-speed DSG, or direct shift gearbox. It's a dual clutch transmission. But on all models of the Golf Alltrack and the Sport Wagon, you can get a 6-speed manual. So if you really do want to have that, the Golf is the option for you. But the Tiguan, I think, will work for most people. Now we're going to jump into the Tiguan first, talk about the interior features and layout there. We'll do the same thing with the Golf, and then we'll take both of them on a road test and go over really what the differences are with these two vehicles. I want to go over some of the dimensions with these two vehicles before we get into all the interior stuff here on the Tiguan. I think it's important. We're comparing which vehicle will be the most functional for your life. So I think it's important for us to do it with this car, the Tiguan. It is 123 millimeters longer, 144 millimeters higher. It also has 25 millimeters more of ground clearance, which could be enough for somebody if they get a lot of snow somewhere like Quebec, where we are. We do get quite a bit of it. It has 160 millimeters more wheelbase, which might help a little bit with rear leg room. And the luggage volume, that is the most important stuff. What you can put in the trunk is 204 liters more than it is on the Alltrack. Passenger volume, again, the entire space inside of the vehicle for people to be sitting in, is 193 liters better on the Tiguan. Interior space, though, is where things get a little interesting. Front headroom, 25 millimeters more on the Tiguan. Rear headroom, 8 millimeters more, not a whole lot more, which is one of the benefits of having a wagon. And 80 millimeters more legroom in the back. But the interesting note is less legroom here for the front. 25 millimeters less front legroom on the Tiguan compared to the Alltrack. But I hope that information was important. Now, if I sit properly, I'm in a comfortable seated position. The seats have good support here. I'm sitting higher up than I would be on the Alltrack. And overall, the interior here makes a lot of sense if you've driven any Volkswagen product. You have their 8-inch infotainment screen here. It has Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, Sirius XM, and navigation built into it. Dual zone automatic climate control with heated front seats and a heated steering wheel. You do not get that on the Alltrack. Also, this system is a 8-speaker Fender audio system, whereas the Alltrack uses a 9-speaker. You get an extra speaker there, and we'll talk a little bit more on that. Also, the mirrors, when you put it into reverse, they will tilt down, and if you did have that driver assistance package, you'd have a 360-degree camera. With this one's just a backup camera, just like the one next to us. Some of the other technical differences with this car: a power lift gate out back. Might make things a little easier. You push a button, it'll open up or close. And the feature that I really like is Volkswagen's digital cockpit. You do not get that on the Golf Alltrack, but it is here on the Tiguan. It makes a huge difference. Such a gorgeous display. We talked about it more in depth when we did the e-Golf, but it really is a nice feature to have, especially on this vehicle. You really do get a nice interior here. It's not premium, it's not luxury. Everything here really is plastic all throughout, but it's functional. It's a little conservative, but that's what we've come to expect from Volkswagen. And overall, everything else is good. You have LED lighting throughout, controls for the panoramic sunroof, cup holders, tons of storage spaces, little nooks here and there, good sized glove box. And again, the seats are very comfortable. You do have a good seating position here, and everything makes sense. Plus, power folding mirrors. Again, something else you do not get on the Alltrack. So small little features there. One of the reasons why it is about a $2,000 difference to go up from the wagon to the crossover. And I think a lot of those reasons are why people are picking the Tiguan over the Golf, just because you do get a little bit more for not a whole lot more. But it is the second row that gives people a little bit more flexibility here in North America, because it is the long wheelbase version. You get a little bit more legroom here. I'm pretty comfortable here. Good seating position again. Headroom isn't bad at all. You do have lights. They're all LED. Space is good. Armrest is about the same that we saw there. And again, backseat features are about the same. You do have vents in the center, but you do get a USB outlet and a 12-volt plug. The big difference too with the Tiguan is you do have the option to have a third row if you choose to. Pay about, I think it's $800 Canadian to get the third row there. So if you really do need to throw everybody into the car, you have that option there. This one's configured just as the 3-seater, which I think most people will probably be buying here in Canada anyway. But again, good seating position compared to the Golf. But let's go take a look at that now, see how it compares, and then we'll take them both on a road test. Now, I haven't adjusted the tripod height so that you guys can maybe see a little bit of a difference of how the actual ride height, ground clearance changes with this vehicle. Also seating position. So the camera is at basically the same angle, but you're seeing me from this angle now. It's a little different. Now, like I said, the interior here is a little different than you get on the Tiguan. Essentially, you just have a little bit more legroom when it comes to the front passenger space here on the Alltrack, mostly because you're sitting a little lower down, so your legs need a little bit more space to extend out. Personally, I like this a lot more in terms of the overall feel of the vehicle. Tiguan has more space and is a little bit more comfortable with better visibility for height, but I really do like a car. I just find that they drive a lot better, and it's my personal preference to have something like a wagon. The fact that they offer it here is a great plus. Tech-wise, as I mentioned, pretty much all the same. You have dual zone climate control, heated front seats, but no heated steering wheel, navigation with all the same fixins, one extra speaker for the Fender audio system here, but no digital gauge cluster. Bit of a bummer, but still works well enough, even though the little screen on the inside is a little 8-bit-esque. And that's why I wanted to do the Tiguan versus the Golf, because the interiors now on most manufacturers are essentially cookie cutter. They make it so it's easy to transition between one vehicle and another. It gives us a good opportunity to show you exactly what's different tech-wise between these two vehicles, since they do use a lot of the same tech, a lot of the same layout, a lot of the same design. You can see what you get more with one over the other. So overall, everything else here is essentially the same. Like I mentioned, you do lose out on heated steering wheel, power folding mirrors, digital gauge cluster, but the rest of it more or less is about the same. but it is backseat space that you will find the biggest difference between these two vehicles. I have less headroom back here for sure. As we mentioned, it is smaller. I don't fit quite as well, especially legroom wise. I have the seat seated where I would be for driving on both vehicles, but back here I have less space, both width and lengthwise, not to mention vertically as well going up. So a little bit less space back here, but again, tech is pretty similar. 2 cup holders for the center with an armrest, can push it out of the way. You have the 2 vents built in to the center tunnel, on-off switch, but there's no USB charging or anything like that back here, plus no heated seats on either vehicle as configured. But it depends on what you're using the vehicle for. My daughter fits back here no problem. If you're putting adults back here, it works. Is it going to be comfortable on a long trip? Maybe not so much, but it depends on the driver, it depends on the size of the people. Comes down to the trunk size as well. A little bit smaller on this, but still very functional, especially when you put the seats flat, and if you don't opt for the 3rd row on the Tiguan. But I think the most important thing for a lot of buyers comes down to how they drive on the road. Most part, you're not going to be sitting in the car, parked somewhere, thinking about how great the car is. You actually want to drive it. Engines are similar enough, but the transmissions and power to weight ratio are very important when it comes to these two vehicles. So we're going to start off with the Tiguan, finish off with the Golf, and talk about everything else you need to know if you're in the market for a $40,000-ish utility vehicle. So as I mentioned on the outside, the power to weight ratio is just a little different between the two vehicles. They're very, very close, but this one's off by just a teeny tiny bit. 184 horsepower, 221 pound-feet of torque is pretty decent for this size of vehicle, especially since it is bigger than the outgoing Tiguan. Shouldn't be an issue for anybody getting onto the road. 2-liter engine with the 8-speed transmission. Again, fully automatic, not like the Golf where it has a DSG, which certainly gives it a little bit more fun. But if you put the car into sport mode, controls here are a little bit different than we got on the Alltrack, just so you have a little bit more off-road control with this one. But you can put it into Tiptronic mode, and it goes just like the Golf. Driving experience is going to be a little bit different than you do have. They're a little bit higher up, but again, you know, a lot of people like these vehicles because they sit higher up. And again, my seating position here is really comfortable. It's one of the first things you'll notice when you get into this is just how comfortable the seating is, along with all the visibility and overall space. But you do lose a little bit of that driving dynamic. That's the only thing. And again, if you really want a manual, the Golf Alltrack has that option. And I think that's a really strong selling point. Something that we talk about actually pretty often on TestDrive, that if you want a manual, there's not a lot of options out there. But one benefit of Volkswagen is pretty much all of their sedans, their hatchbacks, they all have the option for a manual, so you can still have some fun as you're driving along. But it's going to be the space that's going to be the biggest change between these two vehicles. And I hate to admit it because I do love wagons so much, but you do get a little bit more space in here, and it just is a little bit more comfortable. So if you've got friends or family, you can have somebody in the back seat. They're going to be pretty comfortable back there. If you need that 3rd row, you have that option as well. So it really comes down to what people are looking for out of their vehicle. And I get asked that quite a bit. You know, I need something that's going to fit all my kids' stuff in it. I've got 2 kids. They have soccer practice, hockey practice, things like that. Something like the Tiguan's going to work a little bit better for you. Again, unless you absolutely want to have the manual, the Golf Alltrack's there. Now, a couple other things quickly about the drive of this. It does have an auto stop start system on here. People don't like them too much. You can turn it off. Luckily, there is a button for it. One of the changes between this and the Golf, there is no stop start system on that vehicle. So speaking of the drive modes, again, you've got Sport, Eco, and Normal like we saw on the Alltrack. You also have an off-road, a custom off-road, which you don't get on that. And then there is a snow mode, which could be helpful for people here in Canada, again, because we get so much snow, especially in Quebec. It is a nice feature to have. But if we put it back into sport mode again and put it into manual, yeah, you can feel right away that it's not that DSG transmission. It takes about a second or so for it to shift. It's not the worst case. Again, most people who are buying a crossover, they're not overly worried about the sportiness or the performance out of the transmissions. But again, it's something kind of fun to note. And one thing we didn't really talk about on the outside was just the look of both of the vehicles. And I really got to say that the modern Volkswagens, this generation of all of their products, just look really good. The Golf is a handsome vehicle. Mk7 is probably my favorite, both in terms of look and also the overall drive and handling of it. But even the Tiguan, I mean, it's such a good looking vehicle now. It really makes the first generation one look a little dated. But this looks really good. If you want something that isn't overly sporty, you can get the R pack like it has on this, so you do have a little bit more of an aggressive look to it. But it still is relatively conservative, but handsome nonetheless. and you've got pretty much all the features like we mentioned. So styling, definitely top points for it on both models. Again, it's going to come down to what you personally want out of a vehicle. And I hate to say it, I was hoping to come into this review thinking, man, there's no argument whatsoever, we're going to take the wagon 100%, but after driving this around, tough choices. Let's jump in though to the Alltrack, and maybe I can be reconvinced that it is the best option for you. Oh, I gotta say, I'm really impressed with the way that the Tiguan drives and feels. I mean, really comfortable. You sit high up, but it's not sporty. It's also not very premium, right? And that's fine. You don't need to always have that with every vehicle. In fact, we get told that a lot in our comments, that a lot of people like things that are more conservative. But when we jump back into the Alltrack, I remember why I enjoy driving this car. It does have a slightly sportier feel to it, especially with the DSG. Plus, since it's a car that I've got and I don't have to worry too much about breaking it in, I can drive it just a little bit harder. I mean, those shifts are so crisp. That's one of the things you realize immediately when you get into a vehicle with a dual clutch transmission, just how quick these shifts are, and really improves the way that this drives, more so than you would expect on something else. Now, I know you can say you can get the manual and you can do it yourself, and that's true. Again, this can come with the manual, so you have both options with the Golf Alltrack. Now, it's going to come down to space again. If you need a little bit more room, then something like the Tiguan will make more sense to you, especially if you want things like 360 camera, all of the fun stuff, plus the R-Line. You don't get that with the Alltrack, so if you want to go up to that, you've really got that only as a choice. But honestly, I mean, and I said it before, this really is going to be a tough comparison for me, because on paper they're very close. In terms of interior space, the Tiguan has essentially the advantage every single time you look at it. But it really comes down to how it drives. And I mean, like, the Golf is such a great car. I'm really surprised it's taken me this long to come to appreciate this. I've always been fascinated by the older ones, but since starting TestDrive, we just haven't had a chance to drive them. The e-Golf was very impressive. This is also a lot of fun. And really, I mean, it's just magic how they were able to get a wagon out of a car that wasn't a wagon to begin with. They just extended the back end of it and made it work within the platform that is the MQB, as well as the wheelbase that comes on the regular Golf. I think it's amazing. But oh man, what am I gonna do? I actually really like the Tiguan, and like I said, it's so good looking, especially compared to the outgoing generation. It's tough to decide, but again, that's why I want to do this showdown, because they are, believe it or not, comparable. They both have 4Motion all-wheel drive. They both have inline 4 turbocharged engine. They're not the quickest in the segment, but still they're fun, especially with the DSG. Man, it's just so quick to shift it. Unless, of course, you're shifting into a gear it doesn't anticipate, then it's slower, but it's fun. It's looking pretty good for that Tiguan, I gotta say. Unless, of course, you really do want that power. Oh, hear the turbos go. Oh, you throw it into gear. Oh, I love it. I really do. Ooh. At this point, we'd be saying back to the studio and figuring out which one we'd take. It's gonna be tough.